All right, I think we can get started. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. My name is Tanner Watt. I'm a municipal program specialist with Local Authority Services. I'm joined today by CHRISTINA ZARDO, Director of Municipal Solutions for the Food Cycle Science Corporation, and John Watson, Environmental Manager for the Municipality of Dysart et al. In Ontario. Today, we're going to be talking about countertop composting available through the Food Cycle Science Corporation. They are one of the approved suppliers for the Canoe Procurement Group of Canada. Canoe was launched 3 or 4 years ago to help municipalities with their purchasing. So we do the procurement process ahead of time on your behalf, negotiate discounts, and then make that process available so each municipality across Canada doesn't need to do their own. A couple housekeeping notes before we get started. We are recording this event. It will be available afterwards on the LAS YouTube channel and website. There will also be a follow-up email I'll send after with a link to the video and contact information for myself and CHRISTINA. Once the presentation is finished, we'll move into a Q&A session. We're going to do this using the Q&A feature built into Zoom. So at the bottom of your screen, there'll be a little box with a couple bubbles on it that says Q&A. As we go through the presentation, if you have any questions, just type those in and we will answer those at the end. So with that, I will hand it off to CHRISTINA and John.
Thank you, Tanner. So my name is CHRISTINA, and I'm here to discuss an innovative solution to food waste. My portion of the presentation will take about 20 minutes, and following that, you'll hear from John Watson from the municipality of Dysart et al. We will answer your questions afterwards, and for those who do stick around, you'll all be entered into a draw to win a food cycler. Tanner will do the draw and will announce the winner and contact you after the webinar concludes. So allow me to properly introduce myself. CHRISTINA ZARDO, I'm the Director of Municipal Solutions at Food Cycle Science. Prior to joining Food Cycle Science, I spent a little over a decade working in the traditional waste management industry, working for Waste Connections and GFL Environmental. I'm also a small business owner where I provide waste auditing and waste assessment services to the ICI and MASH sectors. So all in all, I've been talking trash now for quite a while, and I very much enjoy providing a consultative solutions-based approach to waste diversion. My personal goal is to help communities keep food waste out of landfills and by association, save the world one food cycler at a time. But enough about me, let me tell you a little bit about our company. We are a Canadian company based out of Ottawa, and we're 100% focused on providing food waste diversion solutions. We do this using our innovative technology called the food cycler. So we have technology available for any type of food waste generator, but you might know us best if you recognize our Countertop appliance. We sell this through co-branding agreements with companies like Vitamix and Breville. We provide this to classrooms through partnerships with not-for-profit organizations, to businesses through our commercial division, and to municipalities through our municipal solutions division. And today I'll be speaking specifically about this municipal program. Our organization has received several accolades recently, including achieving finalist status with Impact Canada's Food Waste Reduction Challenge, on Globe and Mail's Top Growing Companies list, Deloitte Clean Tech Award list, and most recently approved supplier status with Canoe Procurement, which Tanner just mentioned. And what that means is that the tendering process has already been taken care of for you, and you can source our products and solutions directly and easily through their platform. So our municipal solutions are a trusted and proven solution across Canada. We're proud to say that as of today, we're partnered with 71 Canadian municipalities across 7 provinces and territories, from all the way up in Hay River, Northwest Territories, from Nelson in BC and right across to Quebec. We work with many small communities that struggle to keep food waste out of landfill, communities where green bin are not an option, or large communities where gaps exist in their existing service delivery. Now, food waste is an urgent global problem that is preventable and solvable. It results in massive financial losses and greenhouse gas emissions. And here are some staggering statistics. The food waste contributes to 8% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. And if food waste were its own country, it would be the third largest GHG emitting country in the world. In Canada, what we see is that 47% of all food waste is generated at the household level. And Canadians these days are spending a lot of money on groceries and therefore money on food that is wasted. 28% of everything going into Canadian landfills is food waste, and almost half of Canada's 3,000 municipal landfills are now closed. In fact, we rely on just 270 landfills across the country to receive 90% of all of our waste. And food waste is made up of mostly liquid. So the impact here is that it's heavy, it's expensive to truck around and to pay for disposal. So all of these things have a strong municipal impact. And one of these impacts is that because it makes up so much of our residential waste stream, it's filling up our landfills, and operating, closing, and monitoring a landfill is expensive. So we want to extend the lifespan for as long as possible. The environmental impact, as I alluded to before, is that when food waste goes into a landfill and it gets buried and packed down into an anaerobic environment where it can't breathe with oxygen, it creates methane gas. And methane is a very harmful greenhouse gas, many times more harmful than the CO2 that comes out of our cars. And it's contributing to the impacts of climate change that we're seeing today. And then for the regular homeowner or person in our communities, putting food waste into the garbage is a nuisance. It's heavy, wet, and stinky. It can attract animals like bears and raccoons or vermin. They love to rummage around in our trash. So when we remove food waste from the garbage stream, we eliminate these issues and we reduce volume. For a municipality, this can save on hauling and disposal fees, can save space in your landfill, and it can save residents on hassle and excess waste fees. Now, we often get asked, haven't we solved this already? Because there are options out there, such as green bins or curbside collection. Now, this is really common in big cities with high population density and an investment in expensive infrastructure. But this can be cost prohibitive or operationally challenging to implement. In Ontario, for example, the cost of a green bin program is in excess of $300 per ton. Now, we also have the option to use something like a backyard composter. Unfortunately, backyard composting is not feasible for everyone either. Many people don't have the space, the ability, the know-how, or even the desire to do this at home or in the winter. And there's still the concern of attracting wildlife and vermin. And the other thing about backyard composting that many people don't know is that if it's done incorrectly, it can and will create methane gas. And then lastly, the easiest solution is to continue to landfill organics. This is what we've been doing for centuries, but the long-term impacts here are costly and they're harmful to the environment. So food cycle science is proposing that we change the way we think about managing our food waste at home. We've considered the need for user experience and convenience. And so we've built an at-home composting alternative where you can recycle your food waste in 3 easy steps. All you have to do is add food waste into a bucket, load that bucket into the machine, and press a button. Our equipment has a robust grinding mechanism that can handle virtually all of your food waste, including fruit and veggie scraps, meat, poultry, fish, dairy, bones, pits, shells, napkins, coffee grinds, the list goes on. Once you've hit the button, the food cycler uses a combination of heat, agitation, and air to reduce your food scrapes down by 90%. The result is a handful of dry, odorless, and nutrient-rich soil amendments that you can store and you can use that later. Now, we do have 2 different models of food cycler devices. The one on the left hand here is our original FC30, which has been on the market for over 6 years now. And the one on the right is our brand new Maestro, which you saw in the video. The main difference between the two is the capacity of food waste that they can handle, with the FC30 taking 2.5 liters per cycle and the Maestro using about 5 liters of capacity. Both food cyclers will process your food waste in under 8 hours or overnight. They run quietly and efficiently using on average 1 kilowatt hour of power per cycle. And that's roughly equivalent to having a computer plugged in for the same amount of time. And most importantly, they create absolutely zero methane during the process. You can use the machine anywhere with a plug. Most people will keep it in their kitchen, their basement, laundry room, or maybe even a heated garage. The byproduct that comes out during the process is completely dry and inert, and it's a biomass that has many beneficial uses. Most people will use it right at home to fertilize their garden soil or potted plants, but you can also add it into a backyard composter, tumbler, green cone, and it will accelerate that process. You can integrate it into existing leaf and yard waste systems. It can be pelletized and burned as an alternative source of home heating, or can be dropped off at something like a compost site where that's available, perhaps a local farm or a community garden. You can also add it to your green bin if you're lucky enough to have one available to you. Now, from an environmental standpoint, the food cycler is a net negative carbon solution. What that means is that just like planting trees or using solar panels, when you use the food cycler to avoid bringing food waste to the landfill, you're avoiding more greenhouse gases than you're creating in the process. The same cannot be said for other municipal operations like waste facilities or waste and recycling collection services that rely on a large fleet of emitting vehicles. In addition to the environmental impact, the traditional method of managing waste is a heavily burdened system with unrelenting costs, trucking, labor, and maintenance. Now, it starts when we generate our food waste at home. We throw it into a bin, a hauling truck comes to pick it up. It may go through and handled at a transfer station. Then it's either sent to be buried in a landfill or processed to create compost, which then has to be hauled again before it's used in soil and we can grow more food. With the food cycler, we generate our food waste at home, we put it into the food cycler, and we use it in our soil to generate more food. So it offers a truly decentralized approach that avoids unnecessary labor costs, greenhouse gas emissions from trucking and improper food waste breakdown, and infrastructural costs to the municipality and ultimately to our residents. Now, the benefits of the food cycler go far beyond offering households the convenient in-home method for managing their organic waste. It also provides access to organics diversion in communities that often have extremely limited waste processing infrastructure. This is particularly true of households located in Indigenous, rural, remote, and northern regions, as well as in multi-residential buildings, where these people face technical, economic, and even behavioral barriers to participation with organics diversion programs. With the food cycler, all you need is a plug. It's a solution that can really help bridge the gap where other methods have fallen short or are simply not available. Now, one thing that we've learned from working with our municipal partners is that their residents are very interested in being part of the solution. They want to try new things. They want options. They want their government to bring these things to the community. So the food cycler is something innovative and physically tangible that you can bring to your residents. They don't need to live in a big city to be able to divert their organics properly. We believe that food waste diversion should be available to all Canadians all year long, no matter where you live. And then on top of this social pressure is the impact of some regulations that are coming down from various levels of government across the country. We see landfill bans on organics. We see diversion targets being set and greenhouse gas reduction mandates. So it's important for a community to stay ahead of these regulations and understand what works for your community so that you can implement it when the time comes. So with the food cycler, you're really focusing on food waste. It's that low-hanging fruit, pun totally intended, because since it accounts for so much of what's in our waste, it's the single most impactful strategy to achieving these targets. I mentioned earlier that we're working with many communities across Canada. As of today, we have completed pilot programs in over 40 municipalities and 4,700 Canadian households, and the results have been overwhelmingly positive. 98% of people who use the food cycler during the trial are going to continue using it, and 96% would recommend it to their friends, family, or neighbors. These are figures that far exceed participation rates that we see for things like green bins, where we often see cities struggle to get past that 60% threshold. We also see a significant amount of net new diversion to the tune of about 300 kilograms per household per year. Another interesting fact is that when residents become more intimate with managing their food waste at home using the food cycler, they become more aware of how much food they're wasting in the first place and resolve to be less wasteful going forward. So there is a prevention component to this program that you wouldn't otherwise see. Now, many municipalities that have piloted with us have expanded their programs. In Nelson, BC, for example, after successful pilot programs, they are putting a food cycler in every home in their city of 11,000 people. We recently saw our partners in Trent Lakes, Ontario, recognized with a Municipal Innovation Award for their initiative, which is now active in 400 homes in their municipality, and several in Northwestern Ontario who've expanded their programs recently to hundreds more homes. You'll also hear from John after my part of this presentation about his success story in his community. Now, you may be wondering, what is a pilot program? How can I get involved? So typically, this is a 12-week project. It starts with residents purchasing a food cycler from their municipality at a subsidized rate. They use it, and they track the number of cycles per week. At the end, we conduct a brief survey so that we can evaluate the program and calculate diversion and greenhouse gas avoidance. And we wrap that up into a feasibility study for you. And this data can be used to support your future waste management decision-making, or a grant application to expand the program. And we offer this feasibility study final report and support with any grant writing as part of the cost of the program. You're also probably wondering, what is the cost? So our pilot programs are structured using a subsidy model. Units are discounted immediately through either Canoe member rates or preferred municipal pricing. We currently have a little bit of federal funding that we're using to further offset those costs. We then recommend that the municipality gives a $100 subsidy per unit or per household, and the resident provides the remaining contribution. This has been really successful in making our pilot programs and food cycler technology accessible to more municipalities and more Canadians at an affordable price, while ensuring that everybody's invested in being part of that solution. As an example, with the $100 municipal subsidy recommendation, a pilot program could be launched in your community for as little as $5,000 for a 50 household pilot. We would, of course, work with you to determine the appropriate pilot size that will both meet your needs and suit your budget. Lastly, here are some reasons that may resonate with you as to whether you should consider to pilot with us. The first is that you have the opportunity to trial this at well below market rates through a convenient procurement platform with Canoe. You can see immediate and impactful benefits like waste diversion, lower disposal costs right away, and reduced greenhouse gas emissions. And you can provide your constituents with low-cost municipal services, all while being a steward for the environment. So this concludes my portion of the presentation. I thank you so much for listening, and I will now pass it over to John.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to share with you some information about Dysart's food cycler pilot project that we implemented in 2022. Just quickly about Dysart, we are one of 4 lower tier municipalities in the county of Haliburton. We're about 3 hours north of Toronto. The other municipalities in our county are Algonquin Highlands, Highlands East and Minden Hills. Waste management is handled at the lower tier municipal level. And so Dysart itself is geographically pretty big. We're about 1,400 square kilometers. We have 7,200 households, of which close to 4,000 are considered seasonal, and we're 4.9 people per square kilometer. So we are a small population and we're spread out pretty far between each other. We have absolutely no curbside collection in Dysart. All of our residents have to bring their materials, whether it be garbage or recycling or other materials, to one of 5 landfill sites or transfer stations. To do a round trip between all 5 of those sites takes about 5 hours. 3 hours to do that trip. We're again very spread out. Just to give a sense of our tonnage, we managed about 8,800 metric tons of total waste in 2022. A big component for us is construction and demolition waste, but we're always looking at ways that we can minimize our garbage that is being landfilled or being hauled out of our sites. And this is where the food cycler comes in. So just in regards to food waste, typically there's kind of recognized that between 30 and 50% of the garbage is food waste. So in Dysart's case, that would range between 450 metric tons to 754 metric tons of food waste potentially that we could divert from the garbage through a food waste program. We did do a waste composition study in winter of 2022 that was funded by the Ontario Municipal Modernization Fund. And in that study, 35% of our garbage was food waste. We actually had broken it out to determine how much was leftover food versus untouched food versus unavoidable food waste. So we still have a fair amount of food waste in the garbage that we could be diverting through an organics program. The challenge for Dysart in terms of managing food waste is we have no curbside collection, so a traditional green bin program is really not an option for us. While we have explored doing drop-off of food waste at our sites, we are extremely limited in terms of the infrastructure for collecting that material, the infrastructure for, in an example of a Moloch system, having to lift that material out of a bin, and processing is a big issue in that there is no processing capacity near us where we could send food waste to be composted at a central facility. We have actively promoted backyard composting and digesters for our residents for many years, but the big kind of barrier to using those systems in our community is bears. We are in bear country. Residents, regardless of how much information you provide to them, are not interested in using a backyard composter or digester because of the concerns that they will have bears coming onto their property. We've had bears come into town, opening car doors, for example. So this is definitely a big barrier to using a backyard composter or digester in our community. And this is where the food cycler pilot project came to be in our community. So in October of 2021, Food Cycle Science made a delegation to our council explaining about the food cycler system and an option for doing a pilot project. We did a staff report back in November offering different options for how we could implement a food cycler pilot project in our community. Ultimately, council approved a project for 100 households or 100 participants. At that time, we were able to access some funding from Impact Canada federal program, and the municipality actually provided some subsidy as well. So the cost to the Dysart participant was $150. Plus HST, and then we did a 12-week pilot that would go from April 10th to July 2nd of 2022. In the initial promotion of the pilot project, we obviously had our website. We did a media release that generated a lot of interest in our 2 local newspapers. We did some print advertising and a fair amount of social media to generate interest in participating in the pilot. We just tracked kind of how people registered for participation as all of those different promotion education materials hit the street, if you will. And so again, you can see that the newspaper articles really generated a lot of uptake in that usage. The blue line is the overall registrations over time. When we actually had our pilot participants selected, we ended up having to do a lottery because we were kind of oversubscribed. So we did a lottery to pick those 100 households. We held a kind of a 4-day event at our Dysart Town Hall where the participants could come and pick up their food cycler. They would pay by debit card or credit card. We would ask them to fill in a commitment to participate document, which basically outlined some of the criteria we had for participating in the pilot. We had them complete an initial survey. So we gave them an iPad to use right then and there to complete the initial survey that we were doing. And then the participant would take home with them the food cycler in the box, a user guide, which we created in-house and just printed out a photocopier, and the resident guide, which was provided by Food Cycle Science. Each week of the 12-week pilot, I would send an email to the participants with a link to our weekly log. So the participants were tracking how many times they were using the food cycler during that week and if they encountered any issues. That email that we would send would link to maybe any council reports we were doing about food cycler, the pilot project, or even if participants were giving us feedback or asking questions or providing photos of what they were doing with the finished material, we would include that in some of the weekly emails that they were getting. We really wanted to keep the participants engaged during that pilot process. We did 3 surveys during the pilot project. The initial one that was done using the iPads. At the 6-week or halfway period, we sent them another survey to do. And then at the completion, the 12 weeks, we did a final survey asking some additional questions about how they found the entire experience of using the food cycler. We did a lot of council reports about the food cycler, partially to keep our council informed about what was happening, but also we wanted all of the participants in the pilot to know that their participation was generating information to council, so council could make informed decisions going forward about how the pilot project was working. And all of this is available on our website if you do want to read any of those council reports. I'll just share with you some key takeaways from the pilot project from the final survey. So one was saying the pilot had ended. Do you anticipate you'll continue using the food cycler after the pilot project is over? And the vast majority, 97% of the participants said yes, they would keep using the food cycler, which was a great sign for us. And when we asked the question about whether Dysart should continue to offer this food cycler as a way to manage household food waste, 98.55% of the participants felt we should continue offering the food cycler. So this was a great motivation for staff and for council to know that people really did find that this was a great way to manage food waste in their homes. If you do read some of our council reports, there's a lot of questions that we ask. So there's stuff around if people kind of had a better sense of about food waste generation, food waste reduction, and there's lots of good information about how people really took to using this device in their homes. Just in terms of next steps, back in January, the climate change coordinator who works at the county actually presented a program to Haliburton County Council about implementing a food cycler project that would involve more households. And so the project was approved at the county level. And so now all 4 municipalities in the county will have access to the food cycler program. 500 households will be involved, and the participants will be able to pick either size of the food cycler that Christina mentioned. And after federal funding and a county subsidy, residents would only have to pay either $100 or $200 per unit, making it very affordable and more accessible to more of our households across the entire county. So we're really excited to be working with the county and the other municipalities to kind of get this project up and running this coming spring. Just some final thoughts or things to consider if you are going to be implementing a pilot project. One is skids. The food cyclers arrive on skids, so just be prepared about how you're going to move those when you get them arriving in your location. In Dysart's case, our town hall is from the 1800s and doors were not built to accommodate a skid coming through the door. Just be aware of shipping and how you're going to receive those materials. Also storage. For us, we thankfully, in a way, terrible to say, but because of COVID, our council chambers was available to store the food cyclers before we were able to get them out at that giveaway event. For communities like mine that has a lot of seasonal residents, just consider how you're going to get food cyclers in the hands of people who are maybe here starting in May and you're doing your pilot project starting in April. So just be prepared for that. Also be aware that there is the option for filters for the food cycler, and just think about how you're going to accommodate those supplies. And then the final consideration is Square, which is what we used when we did the transactions on debit card or credit card. That's kind of our you could pay tap on an iPhone. There are obviously credit card and debit card fees to consider. Our finance department was more interested in that than anyone else, but just be prepared so your finance department doesn't freak out that you've got some user fees if you're selling these units by debit card or credit card. And if anyone has any questions, I know we're going to be using the Q&A chat, and I'm happy to share any more information about Dysart's experience. It's been a very successful pilot, and we're excited to see it expand across the county to more of our households.
Great. Thank you very much, John and Christina, for the presentations. We've had quite a few questions come in as you've been speaking, so we'll get them started. The first one, is there a future model being considered which may run on solar? Thinking of remote communities that live off-grid.
So there's not a model that will be or is in development to use solar directly. The device does have to be used outside of the elements, so it needs to be kept indoors. However, we have connected with several pilot participants who have used it in their existing solar system. And because the electricity draw is really quite minimal, they say that it doesn't place too much of a burden on their system. So they've been using that.
Good. Up next, it says throughout the presentation, you referred to the output of the food cycler as a nutrient-rich byproduct rather than compost. Can you help me understand whether the material is composted or simply dried out and ground food waste?
Yes, that's a great question and an important distinction. So the byproduct that comes out of the food cycler has been heated up to such a degree that harmful pathogens are killed off. It's been ground down to a dirt-like consistency, but it is not finished compost. So it's a soil amendment, what we like to call it, because once you reintegrate it into your soil, it will finish off the composting process in a few weeks. So you're really kickstarting or accelerating the beginning stages of compost, but it is in fact not a compost.
All right, thanks. If there are meat or bones being put in, are there issues with rodents or raccoons if using the product directly on outside gardens?
Right, so the nice thing is that they're completely ground down. They end up pretty odorless, but the important thing is to integrate it properly into your soil. You would use the byproduct just like you would fertilizer, mixing it in at a 1:10 ratio, 1 part fertilizer, 10 parts soil. And if you keep it about a foot from the surface, then it will again finish off that composting process. And when properly integrated, should not attract any of those pesky critters.
All right, up next, is there an independent study to back up your diversion estimates?
Yeah, so there are a few. The main diversion estimates that we use are based on the thousands of Canadian households where we've piloted the program. What they do is they track the number of times they run a cycle. And what we know is that the food cycler bucket handles about 1 kilogram of food waste. So if we calculate cycles, we can calculate kilograms and extrapolate that information. We've done the studies ourselves using resident input. We've also had municipalities provide their own data and independent studies, as well as the Impact Canada and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada team that has assessed our program's metrics. And John would also have that independent data as well.
All right, next one is relating to cost. What is the total cost of this inclusive of the initial capital investment, assuming no grant funding available? including operations, carbon filters, power, and maintenance? And what support is available in rural communities that you're targeting if these units fail?
The first part of that question, what is the total cost, is impossible to answer without knowing the different components of a program. You know, the scope, what type of consumables you would include in the program, how long the warranty is for. It's very difficult to answer that question. In terms of support, what we can say is that the Food Cycler Maestro has been designed in a modular fashion. So different components of the unit can be repaired or replaced. In Nelson, BC, for example, where they'll have a food cycler in every home, there's actually a local place where you can bring your food cycler to be repaired or troubleshooted. And outside of that, in rural communities where they're just doing pilot programs, we offer support through our customer service team, where we can troubleshoot, and if repairs or replacements are needed, we handle that directly with the resident.
Great. So we have had a few questions about warranties, maintenance, or any other issues like that, and how they were handled for Dysart. John, do you have anything potentially to add to that on how that was handled in your case?
Out of the 100 participants that we had, I think I had one issue with a food cycler, and it was like handled like that very quickly from food cycle sciences perspective. Like it was like a day turnaround and it was fixed and everything was good. I had one resident who I think just wanted to see me a lot and would call me to have me come to her house and give me coffee so she could have me push the button for her. But besides that, like everyone, there was no real issues. Like people really liked having it in their home, and it was, I mean, people are still using it at the curling club. It's like the #1 question people ask me is when can I buy a food cycler? It is a hot issue, and people are very excited about it here.
Great. So the next question, I'm going to say you already answered, but question was cost to residents a big pushback?
It honestly wasn't. We were at the $100 price point or the $200 price point potentially. Like it's manageable for a lot of people if you think long term. What the cost would be for other options or for disposal of garbage, especially if you're on a user pay system for garbage. Obviously, having a device like this at no cost would be even better, but that's probably not realistic for most municipalities with our economic climate right now. So again, you're good. The more people you can get a food cycler to, the more participation, the more food waste you're able to divert away from landfill.
All right, and the next question ties right into that. Once the grant funding is no longer available, have you considered what the true cost to the residents will be?
We have not, only because it's now moving to the county level, so it's moving even from a different tax base. I mean, not the same taxpayer, but to a different levy. So the county is looking at that perspective.
Great. Up next, may or may not know this, which goal would this fall under the 17 goals of sustainable development? This is something I'm not familiar with. John or Christina, do you know?
I don't know the 17 goals of sustainable development off by heart, so I would have to look into that.
I'd have to look into that too. I know it's a UN thing, but I don't know the answer. Sorry.
Okay, I've got a Google search to do after this, I guess, and learn about that. Question for John. Do you know the split between seasonal and permanent residents in Dysart?
So the split is it's almost half and half in terms of like seasonal and permanent in terms of household count. In terms of the pilot project we did, it was something like 80% permanent, 20% seasonal. That's a ballpark, but I do have that in a report that I can find.
We also have that in our survey that we asked. So we'd have kind of Canada-wide data on seasonal versus permanent. So I'd be happy to connect with the person who posed that question afterwards and provide more insight on that one.
Thank you. All right, another question for John. The residents who participated, what did they do with the material generated by the food cycler? Did it go to the landfill, in their gardens, and were there any issues with attracting animals?
Yeah, so we started our pilot in April, so we still had a smidge of snow at that point. Most people at that point were kind of just stockpiling it, if you will, keeping it in a bucket. But as soon as it got to be planting season, people were putting it into their gardens pretty much right away. Even people like they run the system overnight and then morning have the finished material and then be putting that into their gardens right away. No one experienced any issues with animals going after that material going into their gardens or lawns.
Okay. All right, and a couple questions about funding and financing. How long is the funding available to help subsidize the units? And is there any grant funding available beyond the initial pilot program?
So the funding that we presented today is from Impact Canada through the Food Waste Reduction Challenge, for which we are finalists and we received $400,000. The funding period closes in May or until that $400,000 is fully allocated, whichever comes sooner. I would estimate sometime before the end of April that will be fully allocated. And the other question was regarding grants. There are a few out there in Canada, and we do have grant writing support internally here that we can provide to any municipality that wants to do that with us.
Thank you. All right, next question. Our current organics program accepts coffee cups, fast food, packaging. Will the food cycler break those down?
So the food cycler will break them down in the sense that they will grind them up and mix it into the soil amendment. The only concern is that I'm not sure if that's something that you want to be planting with or integrating into your garden soil, as it wouldn't provide any nutrient value. So yes, it will process them, but you probably don't want to put that into your garden.
All right.
But those items are also a concern in terms of contamination and centralized methods. You know, they go to a composting facility, and when those things are integrated along with bags, even compostable bags, your byproduct ends up being less valuable than it would be if it were clean and just made up of true organic waste. So that's a concern kind of all around.
Thanks. So we had a couple questions come in on what the estimated lifespan of the food cycler is and how repairable is it? Are parts able to be ordered independently? How can repairs be done?
So the lifespan of the FP30 is between 6 and 7 years, and for the Maestro between 7 and 10 years. It is brand new, so that's our estimate so far with the tests that we've been running. And the Maestro is, like I mentioned earlier, a fully modular design, so very easily repairable. The FC30, not so much so. It's typically more of a replacement when there's a warranty issue, with the exception of kind of the buckets, the lids, that kind of thing.
All right, so this question is for John. It's asking what are the next steps? So you mentioned that the program is kind of shifting towards the county. So if you just, if there's anything to add on that, and is there anything that Dysart as lower tier is planning to do as next steps?
Yeah, so the county's taking over the program essentially. So they will start doing promotion in March to get our 500 participants. They've been working in conjunction with CHRISTINA to kind of prepare the anticipated onslaught of people wanting to join up. The lower tier municipalities will definitely be helping to promote that the county's now managing this program and making space available to do pickup events. And we're really going to just be partners in the promotion education efforts to get the word out at our sites and things like that.
All right, thank you. I think this question probably would be for John again. What type of prep work or studies did you need to complete before starting the pilot program?
After the initial delegation to our council, staff, me did a report to kind of explain the options and things to consider. I have had experience running pilot projects before, so I had a sense of how I wanted that 12-week process to run. CHRISTINA was also really great at working with us, ensuring that the kind of weekly logs and the survey questions we were going to be asking throughout the pilot would be useful, not only for the municipality, but for kind of the waste management sector as a whole. So it was not onerous to put this pilot together. I have to say it was pretty straightforward. And once you got into week one, it's you just have 12 more weeks of it. So it kind of, you get into the flow and it went really nicely. It was not a lot of work to put together.
And I'll just add that our municipal solutions team can provide as much or as little support and assistance with the pilot program as you need or want. You know, we can handle resident registration, even payments. We can ship directly to homes. We can administer the survey and wrap that up into that report for you. So it just depends on your level of need. And if you don't have a John available, we're there for you.
All right, up next. From my understanding, the Nelson pilot was on a voluntary basis, as was the one in Dysart, which one can assume are the avid composters in the community. Do you have any insight on the uptake for residents who were converted to using your unit?
So the first pilot program that we ran in Nelson was indeed a voluntary program. So people put their hand up to say, I'd like to try this out and let you know what I thought. And that went really well. But they did have a concern of, are we naturally biasing this information from people who put their hand up to use it? And so the second pilot program that they ran were with randomly selected households who are given a food cycler and told to use this and let us know what you think. And the results were actually even better than the first one. We found that these people had no preconceived notions about how food waste could or should be managed. Perhaps they had nothing and it was just going into the garbage. And they really liked this convenient ability to keep it out of their waste stream. So that was a good pilot program that really solidified that for Nelson, that this should be something that should be implemented at a wider scale.
And I'll just say for Dysart, when we did our first survey and we asked people, like, how did you manage food waste before you did the pilot? 50% were actually just putting it in the garbage. They were not avid composters. A lot of them were familiar with green bin programs from having moved here from the city or having maybe lived in the city, but they did not having access to that. People felt that here is a good option because I don't want to backyard compost because of bears. I don't have a green bin. I want to use this machine instead.
Great, thanks. I think this ties in quite well with what we were just talking about. But does Food Cycler or Dysart have any longer term results from these programs longer than 1 year? Or have there been any longer term assessments or studies identifying how the diversion rate holds up over time?
So I'll jump in for that. I'd say our pilot programs are relatively new. You know, our first one was just done in 2020. So in terms of longer term data, we don't really have that. But when we ask the question, you know, after 12 weeks, are you going to keep using this food cycler? And 98% of people said yes. And we found that the majority of people who piloted have chosen to expand their programs as well. So I think there's a good long-term benefit here and continued enjoyment and use of it. I know I have people who, you know, after the warranty period, it may have an issue with it and they say, I can't live without this anymore. I need to get one. So just really integrated into their daily habitual life. And they find it hard to switch back if it's no longer available.
All right. Are there any reports of negative impacts on plant health after using the product of the food cycler? If it is used at too high of a percentage when mixed with the soil, are there any issues with that?
So it is quite concentrated, the byproduct. It has high nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. It does need to be properly integrated into a soil. Again, just like you would with fertilizer. Otherwise, it will be too nutritious and may burn your plants. So certainly you need to be cognizant of that desired ratio.
All right. And last one, will the food cycler process paper towel waste?
Yes, it will. No problem.
Great. All right. Well, that was 30 questions, which I think is a record for one of our webinars, and they're still coming in. All right. Question for, I think for both. For residents with curbside access, which I know isn't the case in Dysart, but would be in other places. Is there evidence of residents putting dehydrated food back into the garbage stream? And if there is evidence of this, is that adjusted in the reporting or the analysis?
We don't have curbside collection, so everyone is bringing their materials to our sites. But if a person is using the food cycler and then putting the finished material into their garbage, it still is a huge volume and weight reduction that is going to have a long-term benefit to us in that we're going to have to haul and dispose of less volume and weight. So getting that, if someone is choosing to do that, is still helping us out in terms of our costs for operating our waste management system.
And one of the data points that we have in our survey set with thousands of Canadians, we asked the question, what did you do with your food cycler byproduct? And we can see the percentage of people who used it for gardening, shared it with friends and family, took it to a community garden. So we'd have information on that, and I can follow up with the person who posed that question afterwards.
Right. And does the food cycler come with literature to help guide users on how to use the compost?
It certainly does. So there's a user manual, and in every municipal program, we equip you with a resident guide that you can distribute to your residents. And we also have a healthy blog full of information that people can refer to as to how to use the food cycler, what can and can't go in, what you can do with the byproduct at the end, so that everybody can enjoy it and know how to use it properly.
All right. All right, next question is regarding apartments. What would apartment dwellers do with the product if they have no property, no outside area to incorporate it into the soil?
Yes, great question. So in my dream world, you would have a green rooftop where your byproduct can be brought up to. You can have people planting and growing healthy food right on the roof. Where that's not available, we'd look to set up something like a drop-off option, a collection service, where it can be shared with a local farm, community garden, integrated into an existing green bin program if that's available in your city. The benefit is that that ick factor is gone. So people in apartments don't like to travel around with their wet, stinky food waste all the way to the main floor and outside and into the bin. No, this stuff is dry, it's odorless, it stores indefinitely, so it's much more easily managed and can make it into the proper bin if needed.
Okay, and relating to that, are there any plans for a larger unit, for example, for multifamily residential?
Yes, so we actually have technologies that range from the little 2.5 liter all the way up to 1,500 liters in capacity. So we have a suite of industrial or commercial technology, 80 liters to 1,500 liters for any type of food waste volume generator, like a restaurant, grocery store, a central location within a multifamily building or anything like that. So it is available.
Okay. Next question. Have you tried to offer the food cycler in a public space such as an ice rink? John, I think you had mentioned the curling rink in your presentation. So how did it go over at that location?
The people at the Curling Rink love Food Cycler. We haven't installed one there. Public space, I think, is maybe a second phase for any pilot project that is starting. I would say we've installed it at town hall, municipal facilities, and some of our landfill sites. So even the staff at those sites are able to use it in the staff office and then can show what the end product is. Christina probably has some information about public space, but we haven't put it in our arena yet. But who knows, down the road, we potentially could do that.
Yeah, so some interesting applications would be something like a lunchroom, a kitchenette in a public office. We have them in municipal offices all over Canada. There are places like gas stations that have them for their little cafes. So if you're a small food waste generator and that bucket is good enough for the amount that you are generating, it can certainly fit in that application. I think it's about capacity at that point.
All right. And does it handle bones, seafood shells, oils, and fats?
It can handle, the Maestro can handle almost any bone. It may struggle with a large T-bone or pork shoulder, but any other bone it will process. The grinding mechanism is quite robust. And the same goes for seafood shells. Certainly it'll process those. Oils and fats it can handle in small amounts. So you wouldn't put your, bacon grease right into the food cycler, but if you have a napkin with bacon grease on it, that can definitely go in and wouldn't be a problem.
All right. Well, I think we will wrap it up there. If there are any other questions, please respond to the email that I will be sending out later or contact Christina directly. Thank you very much, John and Christina, for presenting. Thank you to everybody who joined us today. We do have more webinars scheduled over the next couple of months. You can check out the LAS events page for those. And we will hopefully see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, thank you.
All right.